Welcome to the Growth Fire Podcast, where we engage with top business leaders who share their experiences and provide real insights that help them attract customers, retain staff, and grow their bottom line. Now, let's get started with the show. Hi there, I'm Marc Reifenrath, the host of the show, where I feature inspiring business leaders from various backgrounds and industries willing to share their perspectives on healthy cultures and motivated teams. Past guests have included the likes of Tyler Kelly, the president of Basis Technologies. If you haven't listened to that episode, I would highly recommend it. It was a really, really good one. This episode is brought to you by Spinutech. Spinutech is a premium digital growth agency that specializes in revitalizing lead generation strategies and accelerating online sales for top brands. To learn more, go to spinutech.com. Today, I couldn't be more excited about the guest we have. I'll introduce him formally in just a minute, but I want to give you a brief overview of his past and his background. So, Sean Magennis is the CEO of Mutual Capital Alliance, a 29-year-old financial services business comprising of exit, advisory services, and public mutual funds. Prior to that, he was the Global President and COO of YPO. Sean began his business career in management at Dow Chemicals and ran his own professional services firm for 14 years, focused on organizational development and consulting, people assessment, and executive search. He contributes 30 years of experience to business leaders in growing professional services businesses domestically and globally. All right. With that, welcome, Sean. Again, I'm so excited to have you and really excited to get into this conversation.
Thank you for having me, Mark. I'm thrilled to be with you.
All right. I gave you a little bit of a warning, but my favorite question that we ask, and this happens with every interview on our side when you're a team member, but when you wake up in the morning and you're walking to your desk, whether that's at home now or in a physical office, what would be that walk-up song or entrance song playing in your head every morning?
Mark, I default to Freddie Mercury and Montserrat Caballé, their incredible song, Barcelona. If you've never heard it and your audience haven't heard it, one of the most uplifting, energetic, and really moving songs. I can play that 50 times a day and never get bored of it.
Awesome. That's good. So do you ever do that? Do you ever have a song playing in your head when you're walking into a meeting or anything to kind of get you jazzed up?
Yes. And some songs, usually it's when I come back from the gym and there's been a string of songs playing like this morning, and there was some rap and bebop and it was all over the place. And, you get those things stuck in your head for sure. But,
awesome.
And I love music in general. I think it's very uplifting.
Sean, so some of the people listening are going to know your background with YPO and whatnot. I've been a member for over 4 years. It's been just extremely influential in my personal growth, my professional development, the growth of our business. And so, you have a pretty colored background with YPO before you were involved, as an employment wise. But I really just want to understand, give us your overview of YPO, pre-working for the organization, during and after, which there's a lot there and we can dig in wherever you want. But I think there's just a lot of great stuff there.
Yeah, I had never heard of membership organizations like YPO. And in 1992, I was living in Toronto, Canada, and I got invited to a dinner at the Four Seasons Hotel hosted by Izzy Sharp, who was the founder of the Four Seasons Hotel, brilliant businessman, really a true servant leader. And Peter Thomas, the founder of Century 21, YPOs, and they were seeding and starting a feeder group to YPO called YEO. And that was my first real introduction to this concept of learning from other people in business, from peers, men and women who were striving to do well and build a business and create some generational wealth, but also to pay it forward by helping each other. And I was blown away. And so that was the start of my association. About 14 years of membership in EO, actually 15 years. YEO became EO. I got very involved in leadership. Peter was a great mentor and role model. And I was really quite amazed at how many business leaders would dedicate their own personal time to helping grow their chapters, bring in speakers, go out on a limb to help, a fellow member. And so I aspired to join YPO when my business qualified, which it did in 2006. So I joined as a member here in the Dallas chapter. Wonderful new chapter. There's 6 or 7 chapters in Dallas now. But I joined the YPO North Texas chapter with 30 other, mainly entrepreneurs. The focus of that chapter was to create an eclectic, entrepreneurial, very diverse community. And I loved that. And I really just have not looked back, really, since 1992. I can't tell you, Mark, how many people, experiences, personal and also, that I've had an opportunity to learn from through YPO and also EO, quite honestly. It's been a remarkable association. And then I got given the greatest gift of my life to date, which was the honor of working for the organization for close to 7.5 years as their global president and chief operating officer, and really helping transform several business units, help cement the integration of our alumni group, and really spearhead the development and the support of the new networks, which is now a mainstay group of products and services for our members. And along the way, just the contributions that I've received, life-changing in many instances, and maybe we'll unpack some of them. But I can't think of a better way to develop as a human being, as a business leader, as a person just struggling to get through life sometimes, as a work in progress, than being supported by a group like YPO.
Yeah. So let's dig into some of those things. So when you first joined YPO and you got into your forum, that stage in your career, what were some like examples of things that really, obviously we all have problems, whether that's personal, professional, family.
Yes.
Do you have any examples that you could share of like, it doesn't have to be the specifics of it, but that was able to really fast track? I think it's a time cheater. Like there's somebody in the room that's already been there, done that can solve those problems quicker. Do you have any examples of that for you?
Yeah, I sure do. One was very personal. Shortly into my forum experience at YPO, my mother was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, motor neuron disease. She was living in South Africa, where I'm from. And it was devastating, obviously, for her and for the family. But I had no previous experience with anything like motor neuron disease and was really at a loss. And you can imagine thousands of miles separating us. I'd flown to South Africa to be with my family, my sister, made sure my mother was taken care of and put in a full-time care facility. But one of my forum mates had a relative who had motor neuron disease, put us in touch with the Motor Neuron Association, and it changed our lives because immediately, one, we had an incredible resource. I had no idea they had a branch in South Africa. Within 24 hours of the referral and the introduction, we had a nurse at no cost at my mother's bedside and really helped her prepare for that 6 month. Unfortunately, she, her disease was fairly advanced by the time they caught it. And, but it was a remarkable contribution. And it was just, it was a way for the forum, that this particular individual to, was a huge contribution from them. It was a simple, hey, this is what you need to do and go and do it. But the after effects of that, the ramifications of that, the help that we received was truly, you can't put a price to that, can you?
No. So there's a forum mate. That's a really touching example and an intimate one. One of my forum mates, he says it really well. I think you'll like this saying. He's like, hey, as forum mates, we're gas can buddies, meaning if I run out of gas, no matter where I'm at, if I call you, I know you're going to bring me that gas can. Whether it's 10 minutes or 10 hours, you're going to do it. And I think that really describes the bond that you form with a forum because you dig into deals. I mean, that's a very intimate and personal thing that is emotional and just it's tough. And the business stuff I think is important, but the keeping a leader balanced on all fronts is really critical. And so what I've seen, at least in my forums, is the personal stuff is actually almost the most important stuff to keep the hygiene of that up and in a good spot.
I think that's very accurate. It certainly mirrors my experience. The business stuff has been very effective. I've learned so much from presentations, and I've learned about industries that I would never have had an insight into. I was in the consulting business for many years, professional services, and still really we're a professional services firm. So I do see the insides of businesses, but not from a leadership standpoint, not from the accountability that most leaders have are not really understood and known by, employees in a business, for example. And having that ability to see how people deal with, a failure, a bankruptcy, an acquisition, taking a business public. I have a forum mate who's really close to 80 who took a company public in the last 5 years. And remarkable that, somebody at close to 80 years old has the energy, the intellect, and the desire to still keep going. I have another forum mate who is dedicated to giving away her entire net worth before she dies. And so the privilege of watching this, participating in it, and being and in forum, you're not a bystander, you're a participant. Somebody said to me early days in my YPO journey, consider what your journey in YPO is truly a journey, but consider it being like walking a path together. You're on this particular path, you're together in your YPO experience, but you start to see other paths and other opportunities. And if you've got that, the forum is for me one of the single greatest gifts. And it's no wonder that it's been copied a million times by other membership organizations. And really, YPO generously has given forum to the world. I see countless organizations, peer organizations, membership groups that have copied forum without giving credit, by the way, that's a pet peeve of mine. But the fact that it's out there and that the essence of forum, participating in forum with suspending judgment, being truthful, being vulnerable, giving each individual an opportunity to speak their truth and share their experience in a way that then allows the rest of the group to provide their experience in return, not should do this, do that, unless you're asking for advice. But here's how I dealt with this situation. These were the results, good, bad, or different. That mechanism, Mark, is so powerful. And I think, by the way, today in the world, think of YPO's 33,000 members in over 128 countries. Every religious group represented, every ethnic group represented. And, it's a group that doesn't take sides, YPO. It doesn't have a political orientation or religious bias. It's a very human organization, if you think about it. And, many YPOs over the years, and I marvel at them, and I've tried to emulate and lead by example. They not only get to lead their businesses, but they become leaders in their communities. They become leaders in innovation, in education, in impact, in philanthropy. So you see this, it really is a microcosm of life, but with a purpose. And that whole purpose of lifelong leadership, curiosity, embracing the mysteries of how you go about things. Gosh, I mean, where does that exist at scale today?
Yeah. And that's a beautiful, I think with where we're at in the world today, what you just described is needed and desired. And we probably need to be a little louder about the diversity of the group and what the impact that has. And I would say
we should be. Yes. I have a friend in South Africa. They're an amazing couple. He was going to be a priest. And he didn't become a priest. They met. They have a successful business. YPO's got a very strong spousal and family component to it, which I love. I think it's its biggest differentiator, quite honestly. But this family, this woman, her passion is feeding people. Think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Her goal is to take their treasure that they've earned through blood, sweat, and tears and provide a percentage of that through a nonprofit to trying to feed as many people every morning as possible so that their bellies are full and that they can then, aspire to learning, getting a job, doing those types of things. I mean, there are multiple examples of that within YPO. And, we scratch the surface when we just talk about business impact.
Yeah.
Yes, business is important because it's a force for good. And I'm a huge, huge believer in conscious capitalism, in entrepreneurship, and in helping people. The old saying, help somebody fish is better than giving them, it's just a handout. And I'm a huge believer in that. But I've not seen it in action in too many places. YPO, I see it in action every day.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Okay, so you joined YPO, you got in Forum, you had that blessing of being able to work for them. Talk about from a culture and core values perspective. So you've seen a few things. You were kind of, at Dow, this huge company, then you had your own practice and you go into this global, networking, and I know from reading some stuff, I don't want to take any of this away from you, but
yes,
this was a big part of your leadership and what you tried to infuse into the organization when you took over and ran it for those years. So just help us understand, your journey with how you've looked at culture and core values over the years and maybe how YPO has shaped that too.
Yeah, well, firstly, coming into YPO, leadership is critical. We've had some very good boards, member-led boards, where you get a very nice, diverse group of perspective. But YPO was very lucky to have Scott Mordell. In fact, you should interview him on your program if you haven't already. Scott is a principle-centered, values-based CEO. I had done that in a small way in my businesses, but coming into an organization that has had as its pillars and platforms certain core values, mutual respect, candor, the acceptance that and the purpose of really understanding that what we were about was much bigger than ourselves as individuals, was very appealing to me. And like a lot of business people, where you've had ups and downs in business, you've been taken advantage of, the world is litigious, there's a degree of skepticism of whether or not leading from values actually works in a competitive, highly disrupted business environment. And I can say with a high degree of confidence that it does. If you lead from purpose with a mindset, a growth mindset, by the way, because nothing is permanent. Accepting impermanence is part of the value spectrum as well, and recognizing that the person you may be working with today is not the person you may be working with tomorrow, that you may not be the individual that will lead an organization 5 years from today. But how do you leave it better off? And Scott had this mindset. It was when I got recruited, Scott and I sat down together by his invitation, and it was kind of like a one-on-one forum. It was, I'll remember it for the rest of my life, and I've tried to use it myself in many instances since then. But we had a list of questions, get to know each other, and then, a series of open-ended questions about how we would want to work together, what was important to us in terms of our individual values, what was my understanding and his understanding of the core values of the organization, and then how were we going to demonstrate that in action. Imagine two members, Scott being a member and me being a member, agreeing, type A personality, strong personalities, very, different experiences and life experiences, but you can't have two people going off in totally different directions and leading, a multinational 75-year-old organization. So I got very comfortable with leading from the second chair, and my role was to work in the business, not strategically on the business. And that clarity was very evident to anybody that interacted with us as a team. one, treating individuals as equals, recognizing that each of us has certain strengths, and we also have weaknesses and limitations. Those weaknesses need to be mitigated, and you can't be expected to utilize your weaknesses for the fulfillment of 90% of what you're required to be successful at. But those nuances start from the proposition of values, purpose, and then making sure that you walk your talk. The worst leaders that I've seen are the ones, and I've seen a few, by the way, are the ones that talk a big game and don't actually live what they say.
Yeah.
It sounds trite, but I've seen it time and time again. And I've made a couple of mistakes in my career where I've been enamored with certain personalities, certain business success, because success is attractive. It's like a moth and a flame. Now, if the moth gets too close to the flame, it's sayonara. And so that takes wisdom, that takes learning, and it takes self-awareness. So those are some of the lessons. But going back to your question, I think the foundation principles of Forum led YPO to have an innate set of core values and principles. Those are inherent in our code of conduct. And then those were disseminated through the entire organization. When we onboarded people at YPO, Scott and I would come to every single onboarding. We would interact with every team member. We would be very candid, transparent, authentic in answering any question that they had. We would share our own unique passion for the mission and for the purpose of the organization. And then we would be accessible to everybody. And accessibility in leadership is so important. The ivory tower concept that everybody knows about kills more good businesses than you and I could care to mention. It works temporarily.
Yeah.
But if we're playing the long game, Mark, if we're in this infinite world, and I love the concept of the long game and the infinite game, because the foundational principles, of an infinite world are very similar and very accessible. It's treat people the way you want to be treated. It's set up, a foundation culture that people can hold each other accountable to, and leaders can hold ourselves accountable to. It also gives us that filter when things come up that may be out of, and they always do, that are not consistent with your values and your purpose. If you've been true to them and if you've lived them, and nobody's perfect, so there's a struggle with every day with some of these.
Yep.
But if you have them and you articulate them and you represent them on a daily basis, that forms a filter for you. And when something comes along that's out of integrity with those values, you have a choice, but you have awareness of why you've committed to something. What's important, it's not necessarily about you and only you. And when people forget that, it becomes starkly obvious. And if you fall prey to the temptations of living outside of values, the results are usually calamitous.
Totally. You have said so many things that we could unpack. That's just great. I'm going to try to touch on a couple. So I think aspirational values, culture, core value, like you just can't have aspirational ones. You have to walk the walk because, your example is giving permission, whether that's spoken or not, to the other team members. I love that you invested, with new team members. That's something I have a high value on too. I try to get with them on day one, if possible, do a cultural and core values overview, because I couldn't agree more that not just saying that as a leader you're accessible, but proving it and literally giving your time on day one or week one to invest that time, because corporate America, corporations in general have taught people otherwise.
Yes.
And you said it too, leading is a lot like a parent as well. You have to be vulnerable. You have to be honest. You have to own your mistakes. And so there's tons of great things that I hope everybody was able to pick up on that, because there's a lot of nuggets that I know didn't happen overnight. That was just amazing experiences. So thank you for sharing that. Okay. There's a piece of your journey at YPO that is probably very relevant for everybody, no matter what. And that's, I mean, you were leading when the pandemic was kind of a thing and then started. And for YPO, there was some pretty tough decisions. We had to cancel the largest event. I was literally about ready to leave for that. And so talk about, I mean, that's pressure. That's a different kind of leadership in those moments. And I think that would be valuable to unpack a little bit for everyone as well.
Yeah, with pleasure. Well, again, I mentioned it earlier. YPO is blessed to have a group of very smart people, both board members, senior leadership, and really even in the rank and file membership of the management team, very skilled people. We many years ago created a crisis response team. I led the crisis response team. We were fully trained by a security company. And the reason we set up a crisis response team good 15 years ago was because we started, when you're doing global events, and YPOs love to go into dangerous parts of the world. It's sort of part of it's part of that adrenaline, ego-based thing. And, but we also have to take responsibility for the care of our members and their families and their spouses. And YPO does thousands of events, as you know, on a global basis. The chapters bear the own burden for their security. But when you come to a global event, YPO takes security very, very seriously. And so we were all trained. We had a 24-hour hotline. We had on several times a year, we would have mock live sessions where I would be called in the middle of the night by one of our events people in Brazil who, had a kidnapping scenario, and we would have to play through and literally act as if it was the real deal. And so we practiced this. So that was in the DNA, and we have a full-time security officer on the YPO staff. And we've always had great vendor relationships, third-party relationships with thought leaders in every country. So when I would go to Singapore, Moscow, or South Africa, or Vietnam, we would liaise with the local embassy officials. We would have boots on the ground to understand what the various nuances were geopolitically, nationally, security-wise. Were there particular things going on that were of a political nature, where there were riots or those types of things. So in the context of our ability to deal with the pandemic, we already lived the mindset of scenario planning and preparation. And again, huge credit to the board and, to Scott and the team for creating the mechanism to deal with it. Now, when you're in it, it's a messy scenario. But because we'd been trained, there was a calmness to it. There was a rationale to it. There was deliberation. There was discussion. There was a clear, responsible, accountable, consulted, informed, a clear RACI for who would be doing what. And there were clear communications. Now, the decisions can always be second guessed, because in the moment we didn't know, sitting in San Diego, that, this was going to be the biggest thing, certainly in my lifetime and in the world's lifetime. So, but we made some clear decisions. We were following the news. We were looking at what other conferences we were doing. We were consulting with medical professionals. At every major YPO event, we would develop a relationship with local hospitals. We in every event, we have medical staff on site. And we have people on standby. So all of those best practices were already in place for San Diego. Now, the powers that be, and there was a small group, the chairman of the organization, the incoming chairman, the CEO, other advisors. We were in lockdown. For hours at a time. I mean, people had sleepless nights. I was there for 14 days, because not only were we there in advance of the meeting, we had our board meeting, we had leadership meetings. We then were going to put on the conference with all the speakers and millions of dollars invested,
Yeah.
Mark, millions of dollars. So you weigh all these things up. You weigh member money, you weigh their health. Now, health became the predominant decision criteria. Could we put at risk one person dying from COVID in an unknown pandemic that was suddenly just going rife? Now you look, I can look in the mirror, and I know everybody involved in those decisions can look in the mirror and say, we did the right thing. Very difficult decision. Now, when you make a decision, how can you make the best out of the fallout from those decisions? Because you have to cancel restaurants that have bought food, laid in staff. You've got commitments to vendors. You've got commitments to all of your production staff. You've got commitments to, you can just imagine. I mean, this is a big production by any production standards. And it was going to have 2,000 members and offsites and all these different things. We bought, much like any major event, you bought backpacks, and we had hand sanitizer, and you've got masks. And so, we donated those to schools and food banks. We worked with the restaurants. We worked with our vendors. Now, some people ended up being unhappy. This was a force majeure event. But at the end of the day, we followed our purpose and our values to do right by people. There were speakers that agreed with us. We weren't going to go and, lay out hundreds of thousands of dollars for somebody that didn't show up, but their contract said that we owed that money. So we had them speak at other events.
Yeah.
And then we were in the midst of that. We cleared up that event. And then my mandate was to create a team of internal management team members with board involvement to really manage through the crisis. So the first 6 months of COVID, I had a team of 8 people strong that worked with me every single day on different elements of making sure that the organization survived, that members were getting the appropriate data and information. So it was outreach to medical institutions, to resources with members that could talk about COVID, that could deal with business risk and business calamity. And how do you finance through these times? What do you do in layoff? When the air, when you can't fly anymore, what do you do? So we literally went through 8 different areas, and every day we would come up with ways to secure the organization, help transmit information to members. And it was very stressful. We got through it. We had phenomenal leadership, and, we protected the organization. And to the extent possible, we transmitted confidence to our members that things were going to be okay. And you know what? There was some silver linings. Virtual forums. Now we've proven that you can do a virtual forum.
Yep.
You can do virtual events, and you can limit some of the cost profiles. Now, members still want to get together, and I love in person. But we learned a lot as a result of that. And the proudest I am really is of the team who would work 7 days a week, just rolled up their sleeves and did what it took. Members and staff, by the way.
Yeah.
And so I'll never forget it. It was for me, it was a signature experience in my career.
Yeah.
And it was not a singular person that was responsible or should get credit. It truly was the epitome of a team effort.
Yeah. Well, thank you to you and all those involved with that, because I know that wasn't easy to make those decisions. I want to point out, you said one member's life. And when you talk about value system there, like the fact that it was literally the health of one individual was the decision point. I think I'm going to guess that not all organizations were looking at it that way. There was a higher risk tolerance, but I would align with you that it should always be one life is one too many. And so the fact that you're thinking of it that way is really, really a great way to tie it back to your values.
Well, and isn't that what leadership is about? Standing in a principle. Now, sometimes your decision, when you look at the lagging indicator, which is the result, the KPI, was that the right decision? A lot of people could say, well, you could have done this, you could have done. There were some angry people, and there were some people that wanted to go forward, and I don't give a damn, and this is the flu, and we just didn't know, Mark.
No. No.
When you don't know, what do you do? I've been in crisis simulation training, and I've been in various venues. There's a phenomenal the Bush presidential centers here where I live in Dallas, Texas, and he has in the library there is a crisis response digital experience where you go in and you get here's A, B, C, or D that you could do. Here's the scenario. Here's a set of actions. What would you do? And then it says, what did he do? And it compares what you would do to what he would do. It's fascinating. So human nature is, and circumstances evolve so quickly. Where do you pivot? How do you pivot? What I admired most about the leadership at that time was they try to look at it from a dispassionate, very pragmatic, and very careful basis. There were no snap decisions. There was no knee jerk. There was no people were not getting angry with each other. We were getting incoming, but everybody took that in and just stayed calm. Now, really two or three people were instrumental in making sure that the calmness, was pivotal, because in the absence of calm, there's just chaos.
Yeah.
And being able to be calm in the center of a storm. My dad was a yachtsman. Him and my stepmother sailed around the world in a 45-foot yacht. And my dad told me a story once. They were in the Atlantic in the middle of a massive storm. In those days, there was no radar. Everything was done with sextants and maps, etc. They had a VHF radio, but they were in a shipping lane. And so there were these big tankers. And in a storm, in a shipping lane, these tankers, if you're in a 45-foot sailing vessel, and my dad said, 24, 48-hour stints literally at the steering wheel, and they would, my stepmother would light him a cigarette or bring him a coffee, and there's a picture of him in rain gear, and it's such a powerful picture of calm in a storm. He would talk about that. He would talk about that as a pivotal life lesson for him, where literally, and on one particular evening in the midst of the storm, they passed within about 400, 500 feet of a super tanker that was not going to move. And they had their sails down to just a jib, the mainsail down, they had the engine going, and literally he could barely see 500 feet. That's how, the rain and everything else.
Yes.
So, and if you can just stay anchored in the principle of this is going to be okay, we'll get through this, and then deal with the incoming on a case-by-case basis. But you have to have that core group or that core leader who can literally stay centered. You look at Zelensky in the Ukraine today. I don't know what I have no idea about the quality of his leadership post being thrust into this crisis. But you look at the calmness, the principled stand to save his people. That's another example of humanity at its best, I think.
Yeah.
And we've got so many examples, right? Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, all of these people that in, political spheres even, and there's some great business people that emulate these things too. We gravitate towards politicians because they're larger than life. But when you look for the essence, in my experience, there's the saying, what is it? How does it go? When the going gets tough, the tough get going. I like to say when the going gets tough, true, authentic leadership emerges.
For sure. You have such a unique perspective. You've dealt with amazing leaders. You are an amazing leader, but there's always these articles and these books, the top things that the best leaders do. But I'd be really curious, boots on the ground, you've witnessed good and bad, amazing and okay. Like, what would be a couple of characteristics that really stand out to you for good leadership in good times and bad times?
So know your strengths, know the strengths of the others, of others on your team, I think is a very, very important thing.
Yeah.
Self-awareness gives you choice, and really knowledge, deep knowledge of those that are around you. Again, I said earlier, nobody's perfect, but knowing who you can rely on, what their specific abilities are, so they're the right people in the right seats, and giving airtime and credit and support and resources to those people, because you can't do it alone. I have tried in many times in my life to go it alone, thinking that maybe I know better, and usually it ends up being suboptimal.
Yeah.
And so the big lesson for me is the most effective leaders are the ones that gather some really good people around them, in many cases smarter people than them around them, but they have that unique ability to kind of connect the dots and see where things lie and be the bond, the glue, the catalyst. And then with good direction and good goals, let those people go. That's such a powerful example to give. And it's alive and well, by the way. You see it a lot in smaller business CEOs like you, Mark, and like I was, where you're running a small, lean business. Every dollar of payroll could mean the difference between, success or failure in a month. The suspension of immediate gratification in big business environments, it's actually a little more challenging, because or not more challenging, it's more nuanced, because you can only really impact maybe 10 people around you. That in a true impact level, you can have other layers of impact. So you look at a matrix organization, look at these giant companies like Tesla and Ford and General Electric and Facebook and all of these thousands and thousands of employees. They have to rely on really good leaders across the board in all of their various departments. And that's where you go back to culture, values, clarity of communication. So good leadership, surround yourself with the right people. Crisp, clear, authentic communication. Candor is a very, very important one. Being truthful without being rude.
Yeah.
Without being a jerk. The jerk factor is a very, very ugly thing in business, and it hurts a lot of people.
Yes.
It's just,
Sean, I like to say, attack the problem, not the person.
Attack the problem, not the person.
Right.
And by the way, if the person's not up to the task and you need to change the person, fair game.
Yes.
But, it's that level of authenticism, I think, is important. And then the one that has gotten me into trouble, but I think in every leader that I admire, is empathy. I think empathy is lacking. I'm not talking about, apple pie, believing everything you hear, but genuine empathy, where you listen, you attempt to understand, you're concerned about the individual, their family, their circumstances. As a leader, if you don't have that kind of empathy, I don't know how many people would follow you for a lengthy period of time. You may get a couple that go with you. And it's the carrot or the stick. I've seen a lot of people that work with monetary incentive as a way to lead, and that only goes so far, in my view.
And I think now more than ever, people need to be led. I've been saying the whole person needs led, not just the work version.
Very true.
Is so important. Sean, I've got to tell you a funny story. When I joined YPO and was getting interviewed for my forum that I'm in today, we went to lunch and they're drilling me. They were relatively new for him, but one of the comments I made that I was not sure it was good to say or not, but they said, "What do you want to get out of this?" And I said, "Hey, I just want to be the dumbest guy in the room." And that was really the way I was looking at YPO as, well, I don't want to be the smartest guy in the room. I want to literally learn from every one of them. And that group has definitely proven that to be true for me. But I say that often because as a leader, it's not about me. It's about supporting everybody else. And I do want to surround myself with really smart humans because that's what is going to make really good business too. And so You had kind of touched on that. And I thought it was, I literally said that when I was interviewed for my forum.
Well, remember, and there's two sides to the coin. There's the light side. A friend of mine, Rand Stagen, says this beautifully. If you look at it, there's the light side, and then there's the dark side. And many of us, all of us, have both in our personalities. It's understanding and being aware of what those are, and then not going to the dark side. Like, I've seen very selfish leadership behavior. And even within the YPO context, and I'm not going to go into specifics, but I've seen some leaders take advantage of their position to further their own ends, their own personal agenda, their own personal ego. And in a community where that is taboo, it still exists, but it doesn't flourish. The good news is it's cyclical. And the beauty of communities like YPO is that they refresh. It's appropriate. I had a phenomenal 7 years of working on behalf of members, for members. My time was my time. It was a fantastic time. I needed to refresh. I needed to upskill and go in different directions. So my time was very appropriate for me when that particular opportunity was ended. Going back to be a member has allowed me to really appreciate even more the benefits of the organization, because I started as a member, then became an employee, then now I'm back as a member, fully participating in my chapter, going to events, loving it. But I have a deeper appreciation for the art of leading well as a member leader in YPO, leading with ethics, leading with servant leadership, leading without personal agenda. And it's very obvious when you lead with personal agenda in an organization like YPO. YPO doesn't like it has a way of correcting and going back to it. And I think that's part of our culture. It's part of our code of conduct. It's part of the ethos of why Ray Hickok, right from the very beginning, started YPO. It was, I need help. I'm a young CEO. Suddenly I've got control of a family business and I'm lonely. I don't know what I don't know. And I'm a human being. So help me, and that, if we stay true to that, that's what I call the soul of YPO. And I met thousands, Mark, people like you who have this deep, abiding care for their journey in life, for the impact that they have. And the longer you're in, this is my experience, the longer that I've been in organizations like EO and YPO, the more aware I am of just how beneficial and how impactful. So the gratitude level that I have is, I would do anything for these organizations.
Yeah. I think something I've been blown away with is I've met some random YPOers on trips, and you get to talking and you realize it. I've had the micro forums, which have just been amazing. But every conversation you have with a YPOer, the trust wall goes down instantly. This understanding that we have, this agreement that we have when we joined of that confidentiality and whatnot. I've been in business meetings where it's with another member and like, do we need to sign an NDA? And I said, YPO confidential, okay. And they're like, yep. And it's boom, you go right into it. And so you just get deep so fast. You could be crying with another person in 20 minutes that you just met, where with another human being, that would definitely not happen that quickly for most people, at least not for me. But you just go to levels that you would never get to. And I don't even know if me saying that truly articulates and gives it justice of how it really is. But that is such a unique thing to the organization that you just can't put a big enough value on.
You can't put a value on it. And then the underpinning of lifelong learning. If we as a society could take what we've learned at YPO and instill that at the community level, at the educational level, early childhood education. If we could help civic leaders, just take Forum, Mark. We could take Forum into every civic institution in this country or in any country, just based on the principles of how we interact and how we trust and how you don't break confidences. The simplicity of respect, Chatham House rules, it's powerful and it creates dialogue, it creates acceptance. You don't have to agree with it, but it gives you access to understanding it, somebody else's viewpoint.
Yeah.
There's a group in YPO, it's called the Peace Action Network. It's an amazing group of members, if you haven't heard of it. And they have a methodology which they teach conflict resolution. And they do it at a scale that's remarkable. You know that there are members that are working on the Israeli-Palestinian debate and conflict. There were members during the apartheid years in South Africa that completely confidentially were sitting down with both, opposing parties and working together to create dialogue. We held a massive event in Dubai that my leadership team, my team led, and we were able to bring in a group of our members that were previously not allowed to be in the country.
Wow.
And there are stories like this within YPO, legendary stories. I have met legends of YPO, women and men who have gone before us. And this is something I want to leave strongly with you and your audience. We are blessed to stand on the shoulders of some extraordinary people that have paved the way for us. And in YPO, there are legendary people that you don't even know their names, but who have impacted society, philanthropy, local communities, industries. They've created industries, created sporting franchises out of thin air, who have created thousands of jobs. A dear friend of mine in Africa employs over 90,000 people and feeds half of the African continent in his business. And the most humble, down-to-earth family. Started humility in the father. The kids who've taken over the business are amazing. But they don't beat their chests and say, look at me. They doers. Wow. I like doers.
Yeah.
I don't mean
you just kind of gave a nice encapsulating view of what embodies YPO. All right. One last question here. There's this only in YPO, and I'm sure you've had a lot of those, and some of them, or maybe you don't want to share, but is there a good example of an only in YPO experience that you could share? Because I can only imagine you've had probably a lot more than I have, but I would love to hear one of those.
I've been extraordinarily fortunate to have had many, 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 and look forward to having many in the future. I would say my 2 trips to Israel with YPO, and I say 2 because I did my first one not as a YPOer. I was in the EO Toronto chapter, and YPO Toronto invited 2 members from our chapter, offered up 2 tickets to go on a 7-day trip to Israel with the YPO Toronto chapter. And I was fortunate enough to take one of the tickets with a forum friend of mine, Robert Powell. And we had an experience on my first trip there with YPO that was eye-opening. Always, I'd studied the 6-Day War. I'd written a thesis on it in my last year at high school. So I had a passion and an interest for Israel and that part of the world. But what we got with YPO is we got a very in-depth, nuanced view of everything. All points of view, all issues, unfiltered, and very, very confronting in some instances, and enabled us to, and also with care, so there was reality, listen to different perspectives, sit though in an environment of how do we improve this? How can we be better? How can we learn from this? How can we adapt to it? How can we make sure certain things never happen again? So that first trip was remarkable. I'll never forget sitting in Yad Vashem, which is the cemetery and the memorial to Holocaust victims. But really what it is a shrine to the importance of preserving and protecting humanity. And I remember my first trip there, sitting there, and it was a smaller group. So there was only about 50 of us, 50, 60, and walking around and really feeling as if I was in a different time in a different place. Going out to one of the border towns and going into the no man's land with special forces and literally taking a risk that you could be shot at. Now, we had bulletproof vests and we were in bulletproof vehicles. And 2 days before we were in that little town called Metula, there'd been a rocket attack and a house had been blown up, and they virtually had rebuilt this house in 2 days.
Yes.
So I juxtaposed that with a trip my wife and I took a couple of years back with the Touch Israel program, which now has become, it's a 10 out of 10 only in YPO event. And I would encourage anybody to try any of these. But what makes Touch Israel very different, in my view, and makes it truly and only in YPO event, is that the members and their spouses are the ones that greet you at the door of your airplane, not in customs, at the door of the airplane. They take you, they literally, from the moment you arrive to the moment you leave, it's a week-long trip. You get a nurturing experience. That's the unique thing. The hospitality. You can go and see a whole bunch of businesses. You can go and do a bunch of only in YPO stuff that's, that Butterfield and Robinson would do, or that the Four Seasons would do, or the Ritz-Carlton would do, or these other event companies. But what makes it unique is you've got members giving their time, their experiences, their unique access to other members. That's only in YPO. And so those two events will live, they changed my life. The one kind of elevated me at an early age and gave me sort of a totally different perspective. With my wife going back, experiencing some of the similar things, but then at our age and stage, it was truly remarkable. And then finally, the friendships that you make in those types of intimate, only in YPO sessions, even though you're with each other for 4 days, last a lifetime. I had a YPO, last comment, call me up the other day and say, hey, Sean, I was thinking about you. Do you remember you and I, the couples we met in Venice at an only in YPO Venice University? And we had such a great time with you. And I just reaching out, and we got on a Zoom. That was by email. We got on a Zoom, reconnected. A lot has changed in the last 7 years. He sold his business very successfully. But it felt as if we were just sitting on, a little launch going between, the islands in Venice. The time just evaporated like that.
Yeah.
Can't replace that, Mark.
It's amazing. Amazing. Well, thank you for sharing those examples. Those are great. All right. Man, there's been a lot of good stuff here. I think I told you this before we started that we could easily talk for hours, I'm sure. Listen, how can people find you now? Are you active on LinkedIn? Anything you want to promote?
Yes. So you can, it's Sean, Sean Magennis, Magennis. You can reach me at Sean, easy on my personal one. It's Sean, Sean at SeanMagennis.com. I'm on LinkedIn. You can look us up at Mutual Capital Alliance. And just thank you to your listeners. Thank you to you, Mark. It's I'm always grateful to be able to share the experiences that I've been blessed to have. And if some of what I've shared resonates and can be useful, I'll be eternally grateful. So thank you.
Well, thank you again. It was such an honor to do this. And I just really appreciate your time. And I know that anybody that listens to this is absolutely going to get better. One of our core values is we get better every day. You said that growth mindset over and over. And I mean, you gave a lot of knowledge here that you shared. So thank you. So awesome. And thank you to all the listeners that took time to listen to this as well. Thanks for listening to the Growth Fire podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.